So, good morning, all of you. Now, I will be dealing with the chapter Human Reproduction. You are aware that you all have already gone through the previous lectures regarding this particular topic. Okay, so before starting off with the chapter, I would like to give you all the chapter overview. What all would you be studying in this particular chapter? Now, in this particular chapter, you will be learning about firstly, the male and the female reproductive system and its organization. And then you will be learning about formation of sperm or spermatogenesis and the formation of egg or the oogenesis. And then you will be learning about the menstrual cycle. After that, the fusion of the sperm and the egg resulting in the formation of zygote, which is called fertilization. And then once the embryo is formed, it attaches to the uterine lining, which is called implantation. So after that, you will be learning about pregnancy and what are all some of the milestones associated with embryonic development. And finally, you will be learning about childbirth or parturition as well as lactation. So this is meant to give you an overall idea of what you can expect in this chapter. Okay. So this gives you the chapter overview of what you will be dealing with in this chapter. Now I will be taking only a portion of this in this particular lecture. But before I start off with my lecture, I would like to give you a recap, a quick review of what you have all done before. So to start with the quick review, I will just give you a summary of the male reproductive system. Now, I hope you all have taken down notes from the previous classes. You've also done your homework once and you've gotten it evaluated. And I'm assuming that you've gone through your NCRT and your question bank and you can remember certain things as I'm going through a quick review of the male reproductive system. So, what do you see in this diagram? This is the structure of the male reproductive system. Now, in this structure of the male reproductive system, first thing you will notice is the primary sex organ. Now, this is the testis, the primary sex organ or the testis. And as you can see, it is suspended in pouch, which is referred to as the scrotum. Then you are all aware why the testis is referred to as the primary sex organ, because it is here that the sperm production takes place, the gamete formation takes place. Then all of you see how sitting on top of the testis, behind the testis, you can see another tube-like structure which is referred to as the epididymis. Now from the epididymis, you can see how the tail end of the epididymis, it continues up, it runs up as what is referred to as the vas deferens. And all of you trace the pathway of the vas deferens here. The vas deferens is ascending up the pelvic cavity, and can you all see how it's passing in front of the urinary bladder? Now this is the urinary bladder. In front of the urinary bladder, you can see the vas deferens is ascending up and it takes a turn. It comes to lie behind the bladder, isn't it? And here you can see it unites with a gland called the seminal vesicle. You all are aware that there are a pair of seminal vesicles, and once the vas deferens unites with the seminal vesicle, you can see a new duct over here which I'm highlighting, and this duct is called the ejaculatory duct, which opens into this duct, which is called, this is referred to as the urethra, isn't it? And wherever the ejaculatory duct opens into the urethra, you can all see a gland over here. What is this gland? This is the prostate gland. Okay, so then you know that this is the urethra which descends down from the urinary bladder and it runs through the external genitalia or the penis. So I think this gives you a clear picture of what you have learnt already. I hope you're able to recall what some of the things that you have learnt. Okay, so if you need a recap of it, I would suggest that once again, Please, to make sure that this review or recap is effective for you, you have to once again open your NCERT book, your question bank, and go through the theoretical part. And that will really help you register, and it gets firmly imprinted in your mind. Okay. So this was the overview, the quick review of the male reproductive system. So what else did you learn? Now let me move on to the next slide. Internal structure of the testis. Now, in order to see what's inside the testis, you obviously have to take a transverse section, isn't it? Sorry, so in this case it's a longitudinal section. It's not a transverse section, it's a longitudinal section that you've taken here. So this is the testis. What do you first notice here in the testis? Now, can you all see there are compartments inside the testis? Yes. What do we call these compartments? These compartments are referred to as the lobules, the testis lobules. There are about 200 to 250 such testicular lobules, which you will see when you take a longitudinal section of the testis. Can you all see a highly coiled tube inside these testis lobules? Now, what are these highly coiled tubes? Now, they are referred to as the seminiferous tubules. Okay, so it's not labeled in this diagram here, but I'm pointing out for you these highly coiled tubules which you can see inside the lobule. They're referred to as the seminiferous tubules. Now, actually, per compartment or per lobule, there are about 1 to 3 seminiferous tubules. How many are there? 1 to 3 seminiferous tubules. Can you all see how the seminiferous tubules are converging over here? All the seminiferous tubules converge towards the center of the testis, and they unite together to form a network of tubes. Now, what I'm highlighting here is a network of tubes, which is referred to as the reti testis. All right. Then from the reti testis, can you see fine tubes emerging out? Now these tubes which emerge out from the reti testis, they are referred to as the efferent ductules, or we can also call them as the vasa efferentia. Now this is what you had learnt, that these efferent ductules are called the vasa efferentia. Now can you see that they are draining the sperm into the, at the back of the testis? You can see this thick structure which is actually one tube. But why does it look so thick? Because it is a tube that is so long. It is about 6 to 7 meters long, and it is highly coiled. And this tube, which appears to be very thick and lying on the back of the testis, is referred to as the epididymis. And see how the epididymis tapers down and it continues up as, what is this called? Now in this they have labeled it as ductus deferens. You know this as vas deferens. Okay, so this was the overview of the internal structure of the testis. So here you started with the lobule, then the seminiferous tubule, then the reti testis, then the vasi efferentia, and then epididymis, and finally we saw how the epididymis tapers down into vas deferens. So I hope it is clear to all of you the internal structure of the testis. So now let me move on to the next slide. Now in the next slide, we are going to learn about the section of the seminiferous tubule. Can you see the tube section is roughly spherical in appearance? Now why is it spherical? Because obviously it's a tube, it's a cylinder. You take a cylinder and you cut it into half. Obviously the section would appear circular or spherical in outline. So this is the seminiferous tubule. Now why do you see so many cut parts? Here you can see in this diagram, that's because obviously it's not a straight tube, it's a highly coiled tube. So when it's highly coiled and you take a section, all the coiled portions get cut, and you can see those cut parts as circular or semicircular outlines, which is shown in this diagram. What else do you see inside the seminiferous tubule? Inside the seminiferous tubule, I'm just showing you a rough highlight here this cell with a nucleus. Actually, it's a pyramidal cell. It's called the Sertoli cell. Now, the Sertoli cell is also called a nurse cell because it provides nourishment to whom? And on the outer margin of the seminiferous tubule, you can see spherical cells like this, which have a distinct nucleus of their own, and these are what are referred to as the germ cells, and these are the germ cells which actually give rise to the sperm. Okay, so inside the seminiferous tubule there are two types of cells. One is referred to as the Sertoli cells and one is referred to as the germ cells. Now, all of you notice outside the seminiferous tubule, they have shown a cell over here, okay, which I'm going to try and shade for you. And this cell, which is labeled, is not inside the seminiferous tubule, but isn't it outside? Yes. So this cell, which is outside the seminiferous tubule, is called the interstitial cell. You have learnt it as the Leydig cell. So the Leydig cells are the ones which are found outside the seminiferous tubules. Okay, so the sectional view is something very important. Now I will be showing you in the next slide as to how to, in simple way, how to represent the sectional view of the seminiferous tubule. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so here imagine this is the cut portion of the seminiferous tubule. Now since it's a tube, I'm showing it to be a cylinder like this. All of you can imagine it's a cylinder and you have taken a transverse section of this cylindrical tube, and because you have taken a transverse section, it has a circular outline. And I told you that here you can find the cells which are pyramidal, which have a highly uneven margin, which have a basally located nucleus. See how I am showing the basally located nucleus, and I also made sure that the cell margin is very wavy and uneven. Now these are the cells which are referred to as the Sertoli cells. Alright, I hope it's clear to you. So this is the Sertoli cell. The Sertoli cell is only meant for nutrition. It provides nutrition to other cells. It as such isn't involved in gametogenesis. Okay, it doesn't form, it doesn't give rise to the sperm. I hope you know it is inside this seminiferous tubule that the process of sperm production takes place. Can you think and tell me, what do you call the process of sperm production? Yes, it is called spermatogenesis. So seminiferous tubule is the site for spermatogenesis. So we discussed about the Sertoli cells. Now the outer margin, can you all see I'm showing these spherical cells over here? Yes. Now I'm also showing a distinct nucleus. Each one has a distinct nucleus to it. And these spherical cells, which form the outermost lining of the seminiferous tubules, are referred to as the immature germ cell. And the reason I'm showing this to you is because I want each one of you to keep a fair copy and replicate this diagram which I'm showing here, so that you will understand, you will register the concept even thoroughly. Okay, so this outermost layer, it's all over. I've shown it only in one place, but please remember this outermost layer of germ cells is present all over the seminiferous tubule, and this the cells which form this layer are called the immature germ cell, and these immature germ cells have an alternate technical term. They are called the spermatogonium. Singular is gonium, plural is gonia, and they have two sets of chromosomes. 2n is equal to 46. As you all know, we would consider them to be diploid. Okay, fine. Now this entire layer of these spherical immature germ cells, we can call it as the germinal epithelium. Epithelium is a layer of cells and it's called germinal because it consists of germ cells, and germ cells are the ones which actually give rise to the sperm. So these are the ones which are involved in the production of the sperm through the process of spermatogenesis. All right, so what are the two types of cells that you just saw inside the seminiferous tubules? You saw these cells which are highly uneven in margin, and you saw them which have basally located nucleus. They were called as the Sertoli cells. And then you saw a layer of cells which basically constitutes the germinal epithelium, and the cells are called the immature germ cells. Clear? So I hope it's quite clear to you. And one more thing I would like to tell you about the seminiferous tubule is, did you all notice that the central part of the seminiferous tubule is somewhat vacant, as in it's hollow, it's not a solid tube entirely, but the wall will have many other cells. I'm going to show you some additional cells here, and I'm going to try and make as much as a distinction as possible. So I've shaded its nucleus, then I've shown it to be slightly larger, and let me put some dots in the cytoplasm to make it more prominent to you guys. Then let me show some little bit of smaller cells here, and again I'm going to make their nuclei solid in appearance. And then let me show you very tiny cells, okay, in groups of 4. Let me make it like this for you so that you understand. And finally you will tell me what this is. There are certain structures whose heads are embedded in the Sertoli cells. And what are these structures which look like tadpole and which have a tail? These are, yes, you're right, these are the spermatozoa. So I'm going to label them as the sperm, or the full name spermatozoan, singular, because I've labeled one. Now did you all notice one thing? Now don't bother much about these cells which I've shown here, this large cell and these groups of 2 cells which I'm highlighting here. These are all the cells, and these groups of 4 cells which I've shown here, these are all the cells which are the ones which ultimately give rise to the spermatozoan or the sperm. And what you need to notice here is, if this is the Sertoli cell, let me just show it to you roughly. The head of the newly formed spermatozoan is embedded. Now why should the head of this sperm be embedded? Because you all know that the Sertoli cell is the one that is providing what? Nourishment to the newly formed sperm. So these Sertoli cells will ensure that the sperm are provided nourishment so that the spermatozoan can undergo a certain degree of maturation. All right, so this is the overview of the section of seminiferous tubule. So I hope it is clear to you. We started off with the tube. And why does the tube look circular? Because it is a transverse section. And what is inside the tube and what is outside the tube? Now here, let me show you that outside the tube there is a connective tissue, and in this connective tissue there are groups of cells. Can you tell me what those cells are called? Now the cells which you would find in this connective tissue, yes, you're right, these cells are called, we had discussed already, the Leydig cells. Okay, so bear in mind that Sertoli cell and germ cell are inside the seminiferous tubule, whereas the Leydig cells are outside the seminiferous tubule. All right, so now let us move on to the next slide. To summarize, so I think we have covered most of what you had learnt in the previous lectures that were conducted. You have learnt about the testis and the accessory ducts, which we also learnt when we took a longitudinal section of the testis, the rete testis, the vasa efferentia, the epididymis, the vas deferens. We've learnt about the accessory glands, the seminal vesicles, which are 2 in number, prostate, which is unpaired, and bulbourethral, which is paired. Then we learnt about the external genitalia, that is the penis. However, in the NCRT, the external genitalia, only the penis is included, but you may also include the penile urethra and the scrotum. But since we are focusing on the PU part right now, and if in the PU exam they ask you about external genitalia, you will just be mentioning about the penis. All right, so this was a part of what we already reviewed. Then moving on to the next slide, we also discussed about the internal structure of the testis, where we talked about the compartments, we talked about the fine tubes, whose section also we saw, right? And then we saw the ducts inside the testis, starting from the seminiferous tubule, which opens into the rete testis, and vasa efferentia, epididymis, vas deferens, and further we went on to see, if you recall, ejaculatory duct which joins the urethra. The urethra passes through the penis and opens out through the urethral orifice. Correct? Then something very important, and many students commit mistake in their cells within the seminiferous tubule, cells outside the seminiferous tubules, the male germ cells and the Sertoli cells, the ones that actually are involved in the production of the sperm. And then we saw about the Leydig cells. What is the function of the Leydig cells? They secrete a group of hormones called androgens. One of the principal androgens in the male body is the testosterone. All right, so I think it is clear to you now. We just completed the recap of the male reproductive system, and we also had a summary of the recap of what are all the essential things we've covered. Now what I want you to be thorough with is, I'm assuming you did take down the sketch that I asked you to take down, and you have clearly understood what a seminiferous tubule is, what's inside the seminiferous tubule, what's outside the seminiferous tubules, and so on. Okay, so with this I would like to wrap up the recap part of it, the review part of it, and now I'm going to move on to the actual lecture which I'm going to deal with today in today's class. So in today's class, let me move to the next slide. I am going to focus on the next aspect in this chapter of human reproduction. And this next aspect is the female reproductive system. So you all are thorough with the anatomy and the components of the male reproductive system. So now we're going to discuss about the female reproductive system. What are the parts of the female reproductive system? Please write this down, because this is a 3-mark question in your board exam. They may just ask you to mention the component parts of the female reproductive system. So a pair of ovaries where egg is produced. So what would you call the ovary? You would call it as the primary sex organ. 1 degree, or primary sex organ, isn't it? Then you have the oviduct. Now let us call the oviduct with a different name here. It is also called the fallopian tube, isn't it? And then the uterus. And what is the common name for the uterus? It is called the womb. And then the neck of the uterus. The neck of the uterus is called the cervix. And finally the vagina. So these are referred to as the accessory ducts of the female reproductive system. And then moving on to the external genitalia. The technical term for the external genitalia is the vulva. And last but not the least, we can also include another component here, the mammary glands. The mammary glands are involved in production of milk and suckling the newborn young, and therefore it is functionally integrated with the parts of the female reproductive system. So we can include the mammary gland as a part of the female reproductive system. Is that clear? The overview. I want all of you to be thorough with this. While I give you about 1 minute time, I guess it would suffice for you to write down the 3 components of the female reproductive system. Please write down the pair of ovary. The first point is a pair of ovary. Then I want you to be very specific, the accessory female duct. Sometimes they may ask you this alone for a 2-mark question. Name the components of the female accessory ducts. So then you have to mention, please take down female accessory ducts, oviduct, better call it fallopian tube, uterus, common name of uterus is womb, cervix, Cervix is the neck of the uterus, the narrowed portion of the uterus. And then finally, the vagina, the vaginal canal. And to the exterior, the third and the most important part, which helps in coitus, is referred to as the external genitalia. It is technically referred to as the vulva. Okay. And I also want you to write down the mammary glands. So mammary glands which help in production of milk and nursing the newborn child. Alright, so I hope you have taken it down. A pair of ovaries, that is the primary sex organ, accessory female ducts, oviduct, uterus, cervix, vagina, external genitalia, that is technically called the vulva, and last but not the least, mammary gland or breasts. Okay, moving on. Now, this is a very, very important 5-mark question. Put a big star mark to this. Okay, every year they ask this question. Even this year in 2020 paper, they had asked about the sectional view, the diagram that you're seeing right in front of you now. This is the diagrammatic sectional view of the female reproductive system. So what do you see in the female reproductive system? You first see the fallopian tube. We'll start off with the fallopian tube. Then you see this inverted pear-shaped organ. It's called the uterus. I put a tick here inside this space, the uterine cavity. And then you see the narrowed, the neck part of the uterus, which is referred to as the cervix. And then you see another canal which the cervix leads into, which is referred to as the vagina. So let us start with the fallopian tube. Even before that, it's understood that there is a pair of the primary sex organs. See here, I'm shading it for you. The primary sex organs are the ovaries. So there's one ovary on each side of the uterus in the lower abdominal cavity. Okay. Now very close to the ovary, notice there is a funnel-like portion here. Correct. Now this funnel-like portion is referred to as the infundibulum. Okay. Please remember, I'm talking about the parts of the fallopian tube. So we have this funnel-like portion which is called the infundibulum. Can you see finger-like projections on the free margins of the infundibulum? And these finger-like projections are referred to as the fimbriae, so that they can grab hold of the egg. The moment the egg is sent out of the ovary, it's released and it is picked up by the fimbriae of the infundibulum. Then above the infundibulum, there is a broader part. The broader part is called ampulla. It is the broadest and the longest part of ampulla. I mean the fallopian tube. Okay. Then further ahead, you can see that the fallopian tube or the oviduct becomes narrow, and this narrowed part of the fallopian tube is called the isthmus. And notice it is the isthmus which joins the uterus. Okay, so the uterus, as you can see here, I put a tick mark for you here. This is the uterus, the inverted bag or the inverted pear-shaped structure. And this fallopian tube, the entire structure measures about 10 to 12 centimeters in length. So it's important for you to note that down. The fallopian tube measures about 10 to 12 centimeters in length. Now, what are the parts of the fallopian tube? Yes, you'll start with infundibulum, and then the infundibulum has finger-like projections called fimbriae, and then the broader part which is called the ampulla, and the narrow part which is called the isthmus. And the isthmus joins, where does the isthmus join? It joins the uterus. All right, so now let me shift your focus to the middle part, this part of the diagram, the entire portion that represents the uterus. You all have to observe that there is a bulged portion to the uterus here. See, I'm shading it for you here. And this bulged portion of the uterus is referred to as the uterine fundus. Then, of course, there's a cavity inside the uterus. Okay. Now, let us focus on the wall of the uterus. So, I've highlighted it for you. Now, what are the 3 layers in the wall of the uterus? Let me first turn your focus onto this highly coiled and these projections that you can see. I'm writing over it. This layer, which is very, very richly supplied with blood, is referred to as the endometrium. So, the innermost layer of the uterine wall is referred to as the endometrium. What is the uniqueness of the endometrium? The endometrium is highly glandular and it is highly vascular, meaning it is richly supplied with blood, and it undergoes a very important thing. It undergoes cyclic changes every month. I'm so sorry. Yeah, so let's move back to here. So I was discussing about the wall of the uterus, which is the layers in the wall of the uterus. So there's endometrium, the outermost layer. Then there is myometrium, which is the middle layer, you can see here. And then there is the outermost layer, which is referred to as the perimetrium. Endometrium is the innermost layer, I'm sorry. So endometrium, you can see how it is folded here. Yes, and it is colored red because, like I said, the endometrium is highly glandular, it is highly vascular, and I also told you that it undergoes cyclic changes every month in female primates and humans, and that is female primate mammals including humans, and this cyclic change is called, it is called the menstrual cycle. We will be learning the details of the menstrual cycle subsequently. Okay, so this is the innermost layer, the endometrium. So endometrium is glandular, it is richly supplied with blood, it undergoes cyclic changes every month during a cycle called the menstrual cycle. Not in all animals, in female primate mammals only. Then the middle layer is called the myometrium, and this myometrium, let me just show certain lines over here. It is made up of smooth muscles, all right? And this myometrium, it helps in parturition or childbirth. So during childbirth, the myometrium, I hope you're writing down all these points. I want you to write down endometrium, whatever I wrote here. Then the middle layer I'm just speaking of now, myometrium. Myometrium is made up of what? Smooth muscles. Now, do you all recall what smooth muscles are? Are they voluntary or involuntary? Yes, think about it. Yes, involuntary. Involuntary meaning they are not under the control of your will, isn't it? You cannot control them. So these muscles, the smooth muscles, are found in this middle layer that is called myometrium, and this myometrium is the one that is involved in parturition. It undergoes vigorous contractions and relaxations and enabling the process of childbirth. Please remember, parturition is the technical term for childbirth. All right. Okay, then moving on to the outermost layer, which is the perimetrium. It is a very thin and membranous layer, the perimetrium. So there is no specific function, it is just a protective covering. It's very thin and membranous. So I want you to remember the functions of the inner layer, that is endometrium, and the middle layer, that is myometrium. Is that clear? So please think and tell me now, did you all write down the 3 layers in the wall of the uterus? Yes, what are the 3 layers in the wall of the uterus? Inner, endometrium; middle, myometrium; outer, perimetrium. Very good. Now endometrium is glandular and vascular and undergoes cyclic changes every month in female primate mammals, and that cyclical change is called menstrual cycle. Very good. Then myometrium, where is myometrium? Inner, outer, or middle? Middle layer. And what is this myometrium made up of? This myometrium is made up of smooth muscle cells. And what is it used for? It undergoes contractions and relaxations which allow easy childbirth or parturition. and the outermost membranous covering is referred to as the perimetrium. So I hope it is clear to all of you the three major layers of the uterine wall. All right, fine. Now as you can see, there's a uterine cavity here in the center, and I also had discussed with you that the uterus receives which part of the fallopian tube? The isthmus of the fallopian tube is what opens into the uterus. And what do you call this bulged part of the uterus? It's called the uterine fundus. All right, so now we have finished discussing about the wall of the uterus. Now can you all see that the uterus narrows down over here? Yes, this narrowed portion of the uterus is called the cervix, which is actually the neck of the uterus. All right, and can you see that there is a canal inside? This canal is referred to as the cervical canal. So cervix is the neck of the uterus enclosing a canal that is referred to as the cervical canal. And all of you observe the cervical canal opens into a broader canal here, and this region, this canal, is called the vaginal canal. The wall of this canal is referred to as the vagina. Is that clear to all of you? So the neck is the cervix, then the canal inside is the cervical canal. It opens into a wider canal which is referred to as the vaginal canal. The walls of this vaginal canal is referred to as the vagina. Now here I would like you to remember one thing. The cervical canal and the vaginal canal together, they constitute what is referred to as the birth canal. Why is it called birth canal? Because when the child is taking birth, it passes through this canal before it moves out of the mother's body, and as a result, since the child passes through this canal, the cervical canal and the vaginal canal collectively is referred to as a birth canal. So you can expect this for a 2 marker or a 3 marker again. Okay, so what are the parts that make up the birth canal? They may ask you, or they may ask you what we already discussed, the layers of the uterine wall. So I hope the female reproductive system, the diagrammatic sectional view, is clear to one and all. Why I'm stressing so much upon this is because this is, like I said at the onset, this is a very important 5-mark question, the diagrammatic sectional view, and you will be given a homework regarding the diagrammatic sectional view. So I want all of you to practice this diagram. This is the same diagram that's available in your NCERT textbook. So we have borrowed that diagram here. So you will refer to the same diagram and you will please practice it thoroughly, and when you present it for your homework, we expect that it should be well presented, it should be neat, and all the parts must be labeled. Is that clear? Fine. So now let's move on to the remaining parts of the female reproductive system. Ovary, we discussed that the ovary is the, what did I call the ovary as? What part does it belong to? It is the primary sex organ, and we can also call it as the gonad. It's called the gonad because it's involved in the production of the egg or the ovum. Okay, so now this diagram will just give you a very faint idea. Let's not get into the details here, not at this juncture, but it will give you an idea of what you would see if you were to take a section of the ovary. So imagine you have sliced open the ovary. You can see a layer of cells on the surface. This is referred to as the surface epithelium, or to be very precise, it is also called the germinal epithelium, because this is what consists of cells which would in the future give rise to the egg. Okay, so the superficial layer of cells is the germinal epithelium. Then can you all see there is a superficial zone and there is a deeper zone in the ovary. This superficial zone in the ovary is referred to as the cortex, and the deeper zone in the ovary where you would find blood vessels and nerve endings, and that zone is called the medulla. It is very important to note that the cortex plus the medulla of the ovary together constitute the ovarian stroma. So please remember the superficial zone, which is referred to as the cortex, and the deeper zone, which is referred to as the medulla, together constitute the ovarian stroma, which you can expect for a 1 mark question. What are the two zones in the ovarian stroma? The two zones in the ovarian stroma are the outer cortex and the inner medulla. And how would you visualize these two zones? For that, you will have to take a section, you have to cut open the ovary, and you can see two distinct zones. What are the structures which you find in the cortex and the medulla? Like I said, it is not appropriate to discuss that at this juncture. When I deal with a separate topic where we learn about how the process of egg production takes place, then I would be delving in greater detail regarding what the cortex is composed of. And I already mentioned that the medulla is made up of lot of blood vessels, isn't it? So I hope the very simple, the structure of the ovary, that is the sectional view of the ovary. So the take home message here is the substance or the tissue that is found within the ovary is called the stroma. It is divided into outer cortex and inner medulla. So I would advise you all to, whatever I am putting it down here using the stylus, I want all of you to take down the same in your books also, so later it would be useful for you as a quick reference. All right, so now moving on to the next slide. So let us see what do we have in the next slide. In the next slide, we have the female external genitalia. Now, just like in the male external genitalia, we had discussed about the penis and the scrotum and the penile urethra. And here we are going to discuss about the external structures of the female reproductive system, which constitute the female external genitalia. So you have the wider, now this is a continuation of the sectional view of the female reproductive system that you all saw. So this is the uterus, and you know that the uterus narrows down into the neck, which is the cervix, and then you saw the cervix extends into the vaginal canal. I told you that there is a narrowed, a broader tube, which is referred to as the vaginal canal. And now you can see how the vaginal canal opens to the outside here. This is the opening of the vaginal canal, which is referred to as the vaginal orifice or simply the vaginal opening. And the vaginal opening is partially covered with a delicate, a fragile membrane, which I have shaded here for you. And this fragile membrane is called the hymen. Above the vaginal orifice, you can see, or the vaginal opening, you can see another tiny opening here, which is the opening of the urethra. It is referred to as the urethral opening. And then moving on to the above the urethral opening, before I talk about the other structures other than the openings, I would like to draw your attention to this structure here. This is actually a tissue, a fatty tissue, which is referred to as a pad of fatty tissue, which is referred to as mons pubis. And then you can see that there are two larger folds of skin on the either sides of mons pubis. These two larger folds of skin or folds of tissue are called the labium majora. And then you can see inner to the labium majora, you have two smaller folds. The two smaller folds of skin are referred to as the labia minora. Now notice at the upper junction I am highlighting here that there is a finger-like projection, and this finger-like projection is referred to as the clitoris, which is found at the upper junction of the labia minora. Okay, so this is the structure of the female external genitalia. So there is a, I'm repeating again, there is a fatty tissue, a pad of fatty tissue that is called the mons pubis, and then there are two larger folds of skin which are referred to as labia majora, and then there are two smaller folds referred to as labia minora, and the upper junction of the labia minora, here where I am shading right now, you can see a finger like projection that is referred to as the clitoris, and enclosed by the labia minora you can see the openings, that is the vaginal opening, and above the vaginal opening you can all see the urethral opening. So these are the parts of the female external genitalia. Now what I want you to do is, in your books I want you to take down or note down the various parts of the female external genitalia. I will also write along with you. So the first part would be, so let me try and write it somewhere over here at the top of the slide. So first one would be mons pubis, please take down, which is a pad of fatty tissue. And then moving on to extending from the mons pubis, there are thicker folds of tissue which are referred to as, let's call it plural, so labia majora. And then inner to the labia majora you have two smaller folds of tissue which are called the labia minora. All right, then what do you see at the upper junction of the labia minora? At the upper junction of the labia minora you see a finger like projection that is referred to as the clitoris, and enclosed in the labia minora you see a larger opening which is called the vaginal opening, and you see a smaller opening which is called the urethral opening or the urethral orifice. So these are the parts of the female external genitalia as discussed in this diagram. So I hope you all wrote down, because you never know, they may ask a 3-mark question. Sometimes they may just ask you to name the components of the female external genitalia, where you have to name all these parts. You just have to mention them. Okay, you can also mention them, you can just write their names one below the other without showing arrows like how I've shown here. This is just to make you understand. So don't show arrows like this, just name them one below the other, or put a comma and name them one next to the other, and that will give you the different parts of the female external genitalia. All right, so what do we have in the next slide then? So in the next slide I was talking about a structure which is functionally integrated with the female reproductive system, meaning it is something which plays a very important role in after the child is born, and in order to produce milk and to nourish the newborn one, to suckle the newborn one, and that is referred to as the mammary gland, so the breast. Now here what you're seeing here in this diagram is a textbook diagram of the section of, or the sectional view of, the mammary gland. So you want to know what's inside the mammary gland, so obviously you would want to take a section. So in the section I would like you all to see that there are clusters of small pouches. Can you all see these? Now let me highlight them for you. These small pouches, sac like structures. Yes, are all of you seeing these small sac-like structures? These are glandular structures. They're referred to as the mammary alveolus. Now these are the most important parts of the mammary gland, because this is where the milk production takes place. Milk is secreted over here. Okay, now what would you call one entire cluster of these alveoli? So one entire cluster, see here you can see so many clusters here. I'm just demarcating it for you. You can see 4 clusters. So one such cluster of alveoli is referred to as the mammary lobe. So basically there are small pouch-like aggregates of cells which are called mammary alveoli, and all these mammary alveoli are bunched together into a group, into a mass which is referred to as the mammary lobe. All right, then you can see these small ducts which are coming out of these mammary lobes, and these ducts are referred to as the mammary duct. These small ducts unite together to form a swollen duct over here, which is referred to as the ampulla. It is in the ampulla that the milk is temporarily stored, and can you all see that a fine duct meets the surface, and that duct emerging from the ampulla is referred to as the lactiferous duct. And on the surface of the nipple, you can see that the lactiferous duct opens. It is through the lactiferous duct the infant draws the milk from the mammary gland. All right, so I hope from the textbook diagram you got a clear picture, at least a faint idea. I will be giving you a simplified diagram of the mammary glands. You will be drawing it along with me in the next slide. But now, to give you a faint idea of the internal structure of the mammary gland, we saw that there are many pouch-like structures called alveoli, which are aggregates of cells which actually secrete the milk. A cluster of such alveoli is called a mammary lobe. Ducts coming out of mammary lobes are called mammary ducts. Ducts unite together to form a swollen region called ampulla, and the ampulla leads to the outside on the surface of the nipple through ducts called lactiferous duct. And one important thing is, surrounding the nipple you can see pigmented areas of skin, and these pigmented areas of skin are referred to as the areola. So areola refers to the pigmented skin present around the nipple. And you can also see a lot of fatty tissue inside the mammary gland. Now these structures represent adipose tissue. Okay, and why do you see ribs over here? Because behind the mammary gland, behind the breast, you have the ribs, and since it's a sectional view, you can see cut parts of the ribs over here, and the muscles which are extending between the ribs, which are called, you've learnt in your first year. Can you tell me what are these muscles called? Yes, intercostal muscles. And the chest muscles, behind the mammary gland you find these muscles which are referred to as the pectoralis muscles. So you can also see these structures when you take a section of the mammary gland. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Let me try my level best to put across a very simple diagram to give you an understanding about the organization of the mammary gland. So I want all of you to draw it along with me. Take your time, open your books, and please draw the sectional view of mammary gland, because sometimes in some exams they have asked this for a 5-mark question. So you have to show the sectional view of the mammary gland. So the diagram of sectional view is a 5-marker question in your board exam. All right, fine. So now first let me draw the outline of the mammary gland with the nipple, and now I am going to show you 3 clusters. Cluster 1, or let me just show you 2 to make it even more simpler to you. So cluster 1 and cluster 2. Okay, now let me label it off also. So this cluster is called a lobe, a mammary lobe. There are 15 to 20 such mammary lobes that are present inside the mammary glands. Okay, now what do you see inside the cluster? Do you remember I told you inside the cluster you can see small pouch like structures? Please tell me, what are they called? And let me show you 4 there, and here let me show you about 3 to make it as simple as possible. Okay, what are these small pouches called? These are referred to as the mammary alveolus. Right, I told you that these are pouch or sac like aggregates where milk production actually takes place, isn't it? Okay, so you saw 2 lobes now out of 15 to 20. How many lobes have I shown? 1. This is the first lobe and this is the second lobe. Now let me show you fine tubes which are coming out of each of these alveoli and which merge together. See? Okay, similarly here, this is tube 1, this is tube 2, and this is tube 3. So what are these tubes called? Now these fine tubes which come out of the alveoli, which emerge from the alveoli, are called, please label it, mammary tubules. The smaller tubes are called tubules. Clear? Okay, now can you all see that all the tubules, they join together? See, they join together, and the tube coming out of this lobe is somewhat bigger in size. Now what would you call this tube? This bigger tube which is exiting the lobe is called the mammary duct. Okay, now see what happens to the mammary duct from this and the mammary duct from this. Both of them unite, correct? And they form a swollen structure, a swollen duct. Yeah, and this swollen portion is referred to as, so how did this swollen structure form? By the union of this duct as well as this duct, and this swollen part is referred to as the ampulla, where the milk is temporarily stored. And now I'm going to show a very thin tube coming out of the ampulla and emerging on the surface of the nipple. The small tube, it's not that small in reality, but of course this is a diagrammatic view. So this duct which is coming out of the ampulla is referred to as the lactiferous duct. This is the duct through which the infant draws the milk out. And where is it opening? It's opening on the surface of the nipple. And like I told you, the pigmented region of the skin around the nipple is referred to as the areola. Alright, so I hope you could follow this diagram, and I hope you all have replicated the same. I started off with a cluster called lobe, and I am again highlighting this cluster in bold. See, so that you can all understand how many clusters. 1, 2 clusters. What are these clusters called? They are called lobes. How many such clusters are there? 15 to 20. How many have I shown you here? 2. Then now let me highlight these pouches again in bold. See, what are these pouches? These pouches are called alveoli. Singular is alveolus. Correct? And then what are the tubes coming out of these pouches called? Mammary tubules. See how the mammary tubules unite over here to form what? The mammary duct. And this mammary duct from one lobe and this mammary duct from another lobe unite together to form ampulla. Ampulla is a slightly swollen portion of the duct where milk is temporarily stored. And from the ampulla, how is the milk drawn out? It is drawn out through the lactiferous duct, which opens onto the surface of the nipple, and the skin around the nipple on both sides is referred to as the areola. Okay, so replicate. I hope you have replicated this diagram as and when I was showing you here. It's important to note that the even though the textbook diagram is a slightly confusing, now you understood the organization of the mammary gland. Okay, so you know that there are clusters called lobes, within which there are sacs called alveoli, which give out smaller ducts which are called tubules. Larger ones are called ducts, unite together to form ampulla, which leads out onto the surface through the lactiferous duct. Okay, so I want all of you to practice this diagram as well, since it's a sometimes they may ask in your board exam as well. It's a 5-marker question, the sectional view of the mammary glands. So what did we learn today? Now that would be the end of the female reproductive system, the anatomical, the structural part of it. So to give you a recap of what did we learn from the beginning in today's lecture. So in today's lecture, we learnt about the recap or the review. We did a review of what you had done in the past 2 classes, the male reproductive system, isn't it? And then I started off with the female reproductive system, and the first thing I dealt with was the diagrammatic sectional view of the female reproductive system, showing the fallopian tube, showing the uterus, the cervix, the vagina, isn't it? Then we moved on to the external genitalia. Remember, the diagram part of the external genitalia is not given in the NCRT, so you may not be asked that in your board exam, but the components they will ask you. Like if you remember, mons pubis, labia majora, labia minora, vaginal opening, urethral orifice, and the upper junction of labia minora, where you have a finger like projection called clitoris. Yes, and then finally I told you there is a structure which is functionally integrated with the female reproductive system, although it doesn't directly participate in reproduction. It's called mammary gland. And we learnt about the organization of the mammary gland, isn't it? And I also helped you draw a simplified diagram of the mammary gland to just make sure that you understood the organization of where the milk is secreted. Can you answer this question? Where is the milk production happening in the mammary gland? Yes, you're right. What is it called? Alveoli. It is within the alveoli where milk production happens. Another question, a quick question. Where is the temporary storage of milk happening? Yes, you are right again. The ampulla. Another quick question. Yes, I know. I will be asking you as many questions as possible. Another quick question would be, where or which is the duct through which the milk is sucked out, or the milk is drawn out by the infant? Yes, you're right again. Lactiferous duct. See, the more questions you ask yourself, the more confident you will become in the topic. Okay, then we end this lecture here by giving you a summary as what did we learn today, so you understood very clearly what we learned today. However, we actually end with a homework, because you know how a homework is very, very important in reinforcing whatever you have learned, in helping you to firmly register whatever imprint. It gets imprinted in your mind once you put it down on paper, isn't it? And because you're expected to do the same in your examination. So please, all of you, take the homework very, very seriously. And the first question is, you have to draw a neat labeled sketch, the diagrammatic sectional view of the female reproductive system. I hope you're writing down the homework. Please take down the question 1, draw a neat labeled sketch, or you can refer to the lecture again, the ending of the lecture, to see this page. A neat labeled sketch of the diagrammatic sectional view of the female reproductive system. Then a very simple question. So this is a 5-mark question along with a minimum of 8 labelings. Of course, if the labelings are less than 8, you don't have to bother, but a minimum of 8 labelings should be there, and neatness carries 1 mark. A total of 5 marks for this question, which is very routinely asked in your board exams. And then moving on to the functions of, state the functions of endometrium and myometrium. Let me give you a hint over here. Endometrium is the innermost layer of the wall of the uterus. Myometrium is the middle layer of the wall of the uterus. Okay, so now please go through the lecture or open your NCRT, read through it, and try to figure out what is the function of endometrium and myometrium. Another easy question, the third and the last question. So I'm not dumping a lot of homework on you, but I want you to be very thorough with whatever you do. Okay, name the 2 zones of the ovarian stroma. Another hint, let me give you another hint. For this you have to take a section of the ovary, because you want to see what's inside the ovary. So you need to cut open the ovary or take a section, and you would see something called ovarian stroma. We had learned it is divisible into 2 zones, outer zone and inner zone. That's not the answer. I want you to name the outer zone and name the inner zone. Alright, so I'm assuming all of you will make the most of this homework. You will do a good job and you will submit your homework on time. Alright, so let us meet again tomorrow with another lecture. I want all of you to be thorough with whatever has been dealt with respect to the female reproductive system of the chapter human reproduction. Alright, so happy learning and happy homework doing. And another important thing I would like to say all of you is, please do a thorough revision of this chapter, whatever has been thought of, by going through the lecture once again, and also by referring to your NCRT. It is extremely important to refer to your NCRT. All right. So thank you so much. Have a nice day and take care, all of you.